I am a product guy by background, and so some of what I'm going to talk with you about today, I'm going to talk about in sort of product terms, sort of technical terms, but this is absolutely an idea that we developed for our entire company. The company's about 140 people, just to give you a little bit of a sense of things. And we use across our sales teams, our marketing teams, our finance people, kind of you name it, HR, everything like that. This is a tool that the entire company absolutely does use genuinely on a daily basis, if I can say that. So, to get started, to give you a little bit of a context. Like I said, I'm one of the co-founders of the company. When we started, there were 4 of us, and we were people who learned about Lean. Myself and my 3 co-founders had learned about Lean in the world of logistics and healthcare. And so we were sort of Lean to the core, you know, the goal and Taiichi Ono and moving stuff in warehouses and all that stuff. Like we were deep Lean. Used all kinds of silly Japanese words. No, really meant it, really meant it. And as we, as we grew the company, we hired people that we had known in our past who really knew this stuff and really believed in it, and we stayed Lean. And as we hired a few more people, those people, because it's a small group, they sat at our elbows, and they became Lean by sort of copying what we did. And as we grew, one of the things I think we sort of failed to do was be Lean on purpose. So I was out talking at conferences, and my co-founders were out talking at conferences, and we put Lean stuff in our marketing materials. But we were relying on that implicit sort of learning to help people become Lean, and it wasn't working as well as we thought it was. And we started running into some problems. And so if you have not been part of a startup, there's very different, distinct phases when there's 5 people versus 15 people versus 25, 50, and so on and so forth. It's hard to believe the change that goes on as you move through these different stages. And I think, and as you do that, you need to put structures in place. You need to put practices in place that help you scale. And we kind of failed to do that. And this is now, it sort of came to a head in the fall of 2014. And we, at the time, were 50-ish people. And we had a big project, which was only a big project by accident, because it wasn't supposed to be one. We were releasing a new version of our product, a sort of a new skinned version of our product for the construction industry. And this was, we were in the construction industry, so this in essence was a dark launch of this thing that was basically the same thing as our main product, but with a different look and feel for the construction space. So really kind of no big deal. Only, we decided that since it was no big deal and if it was off to the side, we were going to try to add some new functionality to the product, to this version of the product that wasn't going to be the main product, because it would be a safe place to test that stuff. This new feature called Connections, where you could connect Kanban cards to each other. Well, because we added that, it took longer than we expected. And people eventually said, well, why don't we add this connections thing into the main product as well? Because we've sort of got the hood up and we're in there, so let's just do it for everything. And initially this wasn't going to touch the mobile product, but while we were at it, why don't we touch the mobile product? And oh, by the way, that's the mobile product for the main thing and also for construction, because we're in multiple industries now. And we're sort of in the middle of it. We're in the middle of the mobile product, and we can't release the browser product even though it's done because we've cracked open the mobile product. And while we're in there, one of our big customers says, we really have to have single sign-on or we're not going to buy 5,000 licenses from you. So single sign-on has to happen right now. And originally we weren't going to market this. It was going to be a dark launch. But marketing said, well, while we're in there, all these things are changing. Before it was going to be this no big deal thing. You can just put it out and people will figure it out. But you're changing everything now, so we have to market it. We got to get the knowledge base. We've got to all these kinds of things. So something that was supposed to be sort of one team off to the side doing this small dark launch had become something that was consuming the entire company. And we were having daily meetings. and we were scheduling things down to the minute and sequencing everything. It was just massive coordination to get this thing done, relative to a still relatively small company. And we got it done. Yay. We had this sort of hell weekend of deployment and marketing and all the other things, and we managed to get the iOS release to go out at the same time, which is a miracle of iOS scheduling for anybody who's ever done mobile stuff in the Apple App Store. It got done. And we had a big party at which we drank whiskey and ate pizza and patted each other on the back and said, "That's wonderful, yay team, you sort of saved our bacon." And when everybody else had left, my co-founders and I, co-executives and I, sort of turned to each other and we said, "That was horrible. That was stupid. We can never do that again." Because it worked, but it really might not have. We could have just failed catastrophically. And so we said, how did we get here? We're a lean company. It's in the name. I mean, we wear like lean, like we talk about this stuff all the time. How did we get there? How did we make this terrible decision? And what we said was, well, it wasn't a decision. We didn't make a terrible decision. Individual people over the course of weeks and months had made a series of slightly bad decisions that compounded each other and became a mess. And we said, well, how is it, we're lean, we talk about lean all the time. We try to talk to people about this. How is it that they made those bad? Did we hire stupid people? And the answer was no, of course not. And we said, so we need to come up with something. We need to figure out something that we can provide to people to help them make better decisions. And prefacing this, lean is still in our name. We love the heck out of lean. And we sell Kanban products, so we love the heck out of Kanban and Agile and DevOps. And none of this is not a replacement system. Please, I'm not inventing a new framework that's going to replace any of those things, because I love those things. But what we realized was that at some level, these things, to the level that individual people understand and can remember, they're management frameworks. They're how you run a team, or they're how you run a company, or how you visualize a workflow. Yes, there's principles, but I would challenge you. I've been doing Agile for a long, long time. I could not tell you the Agile manifesto, nor could I rattle off lean principles off the top of my head. And frankly, even if I was better at remembering things than I am, and I could, there's a lot there. Again, they're organizational frameworks. And so they're very, very useful, but they weren't what we needed. What we needed was a very simple thing that everybody could remember and really use all the time to make better decisions. And we said, okay, so let's look around the organization and let's figure out where are we doing things well? Where are we doing things effectively? Where are good decisions we made? What are teams that are working especially well? And what is it that they're doing? What are the characteristics of doing it well? And what we came up with was that when we were doing things well, we were doing our work in a way where it was frequent, small, good, and decoupled. And unfortunately, there's no vowels in that. So it's an acronym. At first, it was a challenging one. And we maybe tried to squeeze in some other things to find a way to put in vowels by force-fitting some other sort of values in there, and that didn't work. And luckily, eventually, we realized that while it had no vowels, it was pronounceable if you sort of forced it a bit. And we actually came up with sort of two ways of remembering a pronunciation for them. One was the soda can or beer can, as you choose, the FizzGood, right? The fizzing of this, that we want things to fizz good versus fizzing bad when a soda can explodes. The other one was, so I don't exactly sound like it right now. I do a lot of traveling and talking to people all over the world and live in London these days. But I am actually from Tennessee and in the southeast United States. and LeanKit is from Tennessee. So, you know, if you're LeanKit headquarters, then this is pronounced a little bit like it. That fee is pretty good. So, you know, or pick whichever American Southern accent you might choose. Which I have to say, if you watch British television, it makes me probably like English people listening to Americans do British accents. They're kind of rubbish. But anyway, so good. So we've come up with these characteristics that we believe are sort of a good description of work done well, work organized well. But what we were really looking for was, it wasn't, you know, we could have just said, okay, everybody make things frequent, small, good, decoupled, go. But what we really wanted to do, what we were trying to do, was make this something that people would internalize and really understand at a gut level, and even though they might not understand or remember all of the rationale behind this, that they would have understood it at enough of a level that they really genuinely believe the stuff. Not just because Jon, you know, the boss said do it. And that's really important, A, to help them remember and believe in it, but B, it's really important because this is not easy, actually. These things, while they work together in a lot of ways, and it's important that they're all there, in a lot of cases, these values compete with one another. And so there's a balancing act here, and you have to understand the interplay with them. And so what I'm going to talk about, you know, I could just say, hey, the end, frequent, small, good, decoupled, go, have a great time. But the rest of this is to help you understand why these things are so important, why they are so sort of, you know, non sequiturs, or no, excuse me, no, non sequiturs doesn't follow. Without which nothing, whatever the Latin is for that. Frequent. For each of these things, what I'm going to talk about is the good thing is on the left-hand side, and the bad thing that it's competing with is on the right-hand side. Green, red, you know, pretty easy to understand, I guess, if you're not colorblind. So, frequent. This is, by contrast, this is not fast, by the way. This is frequent. So what we're looking for here is, you know, it's got to be fast. It's fast and frequent. So what we're looking for is, you know, not annual, not quarterly, and definitely not sporadically in an unpredictable cadence. Frequency is what we're aiming for. So, okay, I guess slides decided to crash there. That was awesome. Try to recover gracefully from that. Okay, so I'm not going to read this entire slide to you, but the value of releasing frequently, there are many, many things related to feedback and communication. One of the ones I'm going to point out to you as especially important to really latch onto in terms of why the feedback of frequent release. And I really caution you, I'm not talking about software releases. Frequency of delivery of whatever you do to whoever is the next person in the value stream in the organization. That's what I'm talking about here. So I will use software release examples, but this could be marketing teams preparing for a conference, or finance teams doing month-end close, or any of these kinds of things. So, but one of the really big values here is when we start things, we almost invariably have a picture in our head of what that thing needs to be in order to be done. And almost invariably we are wrong. Because we are dreaming way bigger, we are gold plating the heck out of it. And we don't need all of that. We really, really don't. But you can't, it's very hard to argue people into believing that because they like their idea, they hold on to it. If you are releasing frequently, it's no longer an ego conversation. You're having a conversation about things that are done, and you can recognize that, wow, I thought we were only 50% complete, but we're actually done because now that I see it, we're done. We can move on to something else. So, huge value to releasing frequently. So, you know, an example of frequent releasing and moving more frequently, Facebook used to do quarterly releases for their mobile app. They moved to monthly, they moved to bi-weekly, then they moved to weekly. One of the huge things that this does, in their case, You definitely see it in their case, and you see it all over the place. If you're a nerd for mobile release notes like I am, then you see it all over the place. So if I'm doing big releases, I have to do a lot of explaining about what's in there because there's lots of changes and people want to understand the change because they want to understand what they're going to have to do differently or what the risks are, anything like that. If I'm releasing frequently, I don't have to do that because it's really not that big a deal. And so you can do release notes that say like bug fixes and enhancements, or we do stuff a lot, or you can turn it from serious stuff into funny stuff in which you joke about your bug fixes and how you squash them. So big value in communication. People will say, okay, good, well Facebook is sort of new economy, it's B2C, it's not mission critical, it's a relatively new code base, all these kinds of things. So they can do this stuff, they can do this kind of frequency, but big companies cannot do this kind of frequency. Well, so Microsoft, this is their developer tools group. The developer tools group in Microsoft used to be on a 3-year planning cycle for a 2-year release. They did a year of planning, a year of developing, and a year of testing and hardening before finally releasing it. So this was about as slow and bad old school as you can get. And then that bad man Steve Ballmer left and smarter people came in. And they now moved, the developer tools group now moved to, they combined the code base of their Visual Studio Online and their on-prem TFS product. And so now, even though they still have an annual release of TFS, the annual release of TFS is made up by the daily releases of Visual Studio Online. So instead of being a big bang release, it's basically a nothing by the time it comes because it's been getting continuous releases the whole time, continuous testing and risk mitigation. So elephants can dance. To emphasize what I'm, again, this is, I'm not just talking about software, really not just talking about software, and I'm not just talking about to the customer. Because there's that tendency to think about this like what we're looking for is frequency of release to, out to the world. We absolutely do want that. The best way to get it is by each person in the value stream releasing whatever they do to the next person in the value stream as quickly as possible. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, what you are doing is you are shaking up the can, you are bottling up risk along the way, and you're waiting for an explosion. So when you think about frequency of release, frequency of delivery, again, you really can't think about just the finish line. You have to think about each cycle time along the way that's embedded inside the lead time for you lean nerds like me. The reason this is true is not because of Agile and 12 white guys who went up a mountain in the US and came down with tablets that said thou shalt be Agile. It's true because of maths here in the UK. Sequential processes, like most organizational processes in knowledge work, or like factories or warehouses, or the way servers do processing, or the way the highways work, any kind of sequential process where there are bottlenecks along the way where you can't do parallel processing, things come to a bottleneck, behaves in a similar mathematical way. And at the simplest level, it's kind of duh, which is to say that as capacity utilization, busyness goes up, the time to get something done also goes up. If you're busier, you're slower. But the way it works is it's not a 45-degree angle up, it's not a straight line, it's a curve. The way this works is on basically the left-hand side of the curve, if I get a little bit busier, I don't get that much slower. If I go a little bit busier, I don't get that much slower. I can load up on the left-hand side of the utilization curve and not really get hurt that much. But if on the right-hand side, somewhere between 60 and 80% utilization of any organization, busyness load, all of a sudden the curve goes asymptotic. It basically starts curving straight upward. And literally mathematically, at 100% utilization, nothing is happening. Nothing's actually getting through the system. So think about the way most corporate organizations run their timesheet policies and their project allocations, where you're supposed to be 100% utilized on projects. Yeah, no wonder nothing gets done. So a busy system is a system that is literally getting zero productivity. So okay, so good. So John, you're saying that we want to aim for 60 to 80% utilization. Yes, but it's extremely hard to aim for utilization by a percentage. Timesheets are rubbish. People don't know how much time they spend on things. It's a lie. It's a well-organized lie. So you really can't aim for this directly. What you need to do is you need to aim for it by WIP limitation. Instead of managing utilization, you need to manage queues, how much work is in queues, and the Kanban idea of limiting WIP. Well, people who hear that think, and I should put in like a scream slide in here. They hear like, oh my God, limit WIP means I tell my boss we're not going to do anything and we're going to do this crazy lean idea of one-piece flow. And that's not what I'm talking about. A little bit of WIP limitation goes an extremely long way because of this curve. You see how quickly that drops if I move from right to left. So if I'm very busy and I get a little less busy, I drop way down and things get faster. You will not be able to read these slides necessarily, but they're available on slideshows. You can go look at this. So basically the assumption here is an organization that's at 90% utilization, which is very, very busy. You're never actually at 100% utilization. There's no WIP limits in place, and there's a 10-day average cycle time to get work done through this process. So that's kind of the starting point on this mathematical example. If we put a WIP limit in place that is twice the current average of the amount of work in progress, we're going to have a nearly 30% reduction in cycle time, 30% faster, in return for going from 90% utilization to 89% utilization. In other words, you're saying no so rarely that almost nobody would ever notice, and yet you're getting drastic speed improvements. How is that possible? That's crazy talk, right? Well, your average is not driven by your average things. Your average is driven by your outliers. And putting in a WIP limit that's twice what you normally have in process is allowing you to cut off the outliers, the things that are taking an egregiously long time, and therefore really help you to improve your cycle time, your delivery speed. If you're willing to put in a WIP limit that is equal to your average amount of work in progress at any given time, you should see a 50% reduction in cycle time in return for going from 90% utilization to 85% utilization. A little bit of WIP limitation, a little bit less work in progress, huge, huge benefits in terms of your speed and your frequency of delivery. So WIP limitation is a huge lever in your ability to deliver frequently. The other biggest lever that you have in terms of your ability to deliver frequently is batch size, variation, the variability of sizing in work items. So without getting too deep into this, the essential idea is that if I have a very uneven system, I'm not going to be able to get nearly as to the far on the right in utilization without slowing down. So an intuitive example of this, a highway, motorway full of Vespas can fill up much more quickly or much more full and yet stay quite fast. Go to someplace like Bangalore, and you'll see that this is true. Then a highway that's full of very big lorries, very big trucks, and especially a mix of big trucks and cars and Vespas. The different rates at which those things speed up and slow down, that variability, forces you to be much less full unless you want to move to gridlock, rush hour traffic. So it's actually very hard to actually limit your work in progress in order to deliver more quickly if you have high batch size variability, which leads into, if I'm going to deliver frequently, I've got to make things small, regularly small. I am, of course, trying not to have things that are big. That's the goal here. Small. I don't want to be small. I don't want to be big. I want to be small. Which, people will talk about. We have all kinds of story slicing heuristics in software. But people will tell you, architects or designers or sort of take your pick of different people will say, well, some things just have to be big. I'm not sure that that's naturally big, or I'm not sure why the U.S. has a diabetes problem. Not sure. Some things are just naturally big. They should be big. It's right that they're big. America. We would say that some things might be notorious for being big, but they don't actually have to be. And the right thing to do is to ask why. Because most of the time when people tell you something has to be big, what they're doing is they're embedding assumptions that they believe are unchangeable, and therefore they view them like the weather. I can't do anything about it, I just have to work around it. Whereas what we want to do is we want to dig into those assumptions in order to figure out if we have leverage points in our organization. As an executive, I will tell you that if somebody tells me that there's a leverage point where we can gain speed by me writing a check, where can I write this check? Please tell me right away. Before you count, there's actually only 4 whys here. We didn't get to 5. Sometimes you don't actually have to go all the way there. But this is just an example of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So, well, why does this thing have to be so big? Well, it does lots of things and has lots of components. Why does it do so many things? Well, because they're interrelated, John. You just don't understand. They're interrelated. Why can't they be broken into several releases? Well, because it's really costly. It takes a long time to do deployments. It's very risky to do these deployments. And so it's just too much friction. Well, why is that? Well, because we don't have automated testing and release processes in place. So we've gone from this just has to be big to, no, it doesn't. It is big because we lack certain things. And if we're willing to invest in those things, then we can change the dynamics of big and small. And that's something that we can be willing to invest in. And if we understand the value of speed, the financial value of speed, we understand I can pay to get faster, and that's worth doing. In the interest of us starting somewhat late in the whole day, I'm going to skip, or I'm going to hit the high notes in a number of slides. What we're aiming for here is moving away from prioritization of backlogs to round-robin scheduling. That's the idea of doing just-in-time decisions about what I'm going to work on next, because each item in my backlog is small and relatively independent. So I can make independent decisions for each item about what I'm going to work on next when the time comes. So I'm able to delegate decision-making down to another level. So again, I've got a lot of examples here, but I'm going to skip some of it. So that smaller batch size allows for continuous reprioritization. It allows us to do that both at the story level and at the, call it project, feature, epic, whatever your larger item level is. And it puts us in a position where when we make mistakes, because we're going to try to make things smaller, but we're going to fail, that's a problem but not catastrophic. Because when we do make mistakes in our sizing, in our breaking things down small, the temptation is to keep working, but the right answer is to stop digging. Now, if I've got a catastrophic production failure, sometimes I just got to keep working all night till the thing's back up and running. But if I'm doing work that is optional work, that I prioritized, I made that priority decision based on a combination of the value of the item, a sense of how difficult it was, and an expectation of timing. If several of those variables have changed, I should change my mind and work on something else. Also, I'm not sure about you guys, maybe you're better at this than I am, but my experience is that when I keep banging my head on something to keep working on it because it just won't get done and I don't understand why it won't get done, I don't get smarter, I get dumber, and I cut corners, and I embed technical debt, and I regret that later. So when we realize that things are too big, rather than continuing to dig, we need to stop. We need to pull that big thing off to the side and let other things of value continue to flow through our system. Get back to our round-robin scheduling and let the big item be broken down further later when cooler heads can prevail. So we really want to stop digging. Okay, so small. Small is good. Good is also good. Typically, typically, when we talk about things being good, what we're trying to avoid is the alternative being garbage. We don't want to put out junk. We don't want to release technical debt. We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to sully our brand, all those kinds of things. So we're trying to avoid garbage by making things good. In our world, and I think different well, I would say FizzGood is going to work for most anybody. This is an acronym that's actually much more of a software acronym, but this is our rule for something that is good enough. And that is that it has to be TLDR. You guys, text messengers too long, didn't read, which is a good description of most people's documentation about quality and what you're supposed to do, quality standards. So we wanted a quality standard that was actually short enough that people could also remember it, and so TLDR. For us, in order for something to be good enough in code, it has to be tested, which is to say not human tested, but the code has tests on it. It has to be logged, there has to be logging in place. It must be documented at some level, and it has to have been reviewed. Now, these things aren't necessarily done to the nines, but if you fail to have at least this in place at some level, it's very hard to go back later and improve things. Whereas if you have a modicum of this at some level in your work, then you actually can go back later and make things better. In essence, you have the hooks for improvement. Whereas if you don't have this balance of things, and this is a great idea that came a friend of mine, Jim Cowler, who's If and Else on Twitter, came up with. So smart guy to follow, really good speaks at development conferences. So we don't want to be garbage. But unlike frequent and small, where we really can't be too frequent, we really can't be too small. I mean, in theory, there's some point of diminishing returns economically, but you're probably never going to get there, so just assume that there's no there. On the other hand, good is different. We're talking about good enough because we don't want to be garbage, but we also don't want to be gold-plated in what we're doing. So here's a quote from Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn. If you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. This is a guy worth listening to, I would suggest, because he just sold his company for many, many B's of dollars. Frankly, the product's not that good technically. It's kind of a mess in some cases on the back end. But it's good enough. And huge numbers of people use it, and it built an audience, and he sold it for a lot of money. So that's pretty good. Well, people will say, okay, so that was great. LinkedIn got its start that way. It was a startup, and it sort of grew up that way. But if we're an established company, we can't release good enough products because we've got a brand that we're going to sully, and we just can't do that. Well, this is a product from a company that was already a pretty major brand at the time they released it, that was known for extremely well-designed products at the time. Wasn't a huge company, not like they are these days, but a very successful company. So this is the first iPhone. And I'm sure that when they built the first iPhone, what they had in mind was this iPhone and this Apple Watch and the chip that eventually I'll have embedded in my brain that feeds, Johnny Ive design thinking straight to my, visual cortex. So I'm sure that they had some picture of this phone, this thing could only be great if it had all these things. But they did not wait to release that. They released a product where you couldn't cut, copy, or paste. You couldn't multitask between apps. Matter of fact, there was no developer API, so there was no app store. There were only the apps that they had. You couldn't undo. There's all kinds of things that this couldn't do. Compared to this wonderful thing I have in my pocket, it was a piece of crap. I mean, it was terrible. Basically, it was like a phone. You made phone calls with it. Who wants to do that? Well, if they had waited to release the right product, the wonderful product that they had in their heads, they would have missed out on making more money than anybody's ever made in the history of a business ever. They released an MVP and made billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars with a product that just wasn't very good. It got beat up in the press. People said it was terrible, and yet it made lots of money. So This is the idea of an MVP when we're talking about good enough. And actually, to sort of pause briefly on the Apple example, what I'm going to suggest to you is actually the MVP of the iPhone wasn't the iPhone, it was the iTunes store. So Apple had developed a system where they convinced me to put in my credit card and keep it on file and make micro payments to buy small things, which at the beginning seemed like this weird, stupid idea. Like, who does, I'm gonna like buy something for $1? That's weird. But they got that information, they built that, and in essence, the iTunes store became the App Store, and that became Apple Pay, and that became the underpinnings of the iPhone. So you have to look at this, when you think about this good enough, you think about this MVP idea, you have to think about the company and the value stream, not just the product, not just that individual product. You got to think about the product line. So this is Heinrich Nyberg's famous picture about the MVP, which is the idea that we don't want to do things incrementally, which is to say we don't want to build things in such a way that the individual pieces don't have value until the final bit. Instead, we want to build iteratively, which is to say each subsequent release is usable and valuable in its own right, even if it's not our end state. That's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for iterative, not incremental. Again, people will say, well, John, but that's not how software works. You know, software, I don't necessarily, you don't turn, and actually that's not how this works. You don't turn the skateboard into the scooter. You don't actually just stick a handle into a skateboard. That's not how it works. And it doesn't transform into a bicycle or into a motorcycle or whatever. No, it doesn't, not literally. But the company that starts making skateboards learns things about production, manufacturing, design, marketing, their customers, that allows them to build a better scooter than they would have, that allows them to build a better bicycle than they would have, that allows them to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To use another example of this, Honda, which now makes airplanes and cars, started out in the business of making generators. So they started building power systems, motors, which then later on they put into scooters and motorcycles, which later on they put into cars, which later on they put into airplanes. So they literally built their way from the ground up with a model very much like this. So take this very seriously. However, the picture's wrong. So this and the previous was somebody's prettying up of Heinrich's initial picture. So notice on the right-hand side, the car is the same, both top and bottom. It's not in the actual picture. In the actual picture, what I have on the top is a hardtop, and on the bottom I have a convertible. On the top, I'm happy. On the bottom, I'm ecstatic. Because what we did by delivering iteratively is we actually learned what our customers really wanted, which means we built a better product in the end. We didn't build the thing we thought we were going to build. We built something that was actually better than that. All right. So I want things to be frequent, small, good, and decoupled. So clearly, we don't want to cause damage in our organizations. When we have a single team, I can release garbage and I hurt nobody but myself. If I'm in a multi-team environment, then one team releasing garbage can inadvertently hurt other teams that one team is completely unaware of, because those teams have dependencies between one another. And what I'm aiming for when I do this, when I do work, is I'm aiming to first do no harm. When we set out on a project, we have a hypothesis that this project will make things better. Our customers will like this. This will help us do things. But it's a hypothesis. We're very likely to be wrong. In fact, if we're innovating frequently, we should be wrong quite often. Be very scared if you're right too often. You're not innovating. You're not doing hard things. But when we innovate, we have to be careful that we're not just aiming for the beneficence, we're not just aiming for the good, we're designing our process to avoid maleficence, to avoid harm. So think about a doctor, right? I believe the patient has some disease. I believe that if I prescribe them some medication, this will cause them benefit, they will get better. But I want to be really, really careful to understand the situation so I don't kill them by accident along the way. So we're trying to balance that helping while not harming. The typical way that organizations do this is by coordination. Going back to the beginning of the story, right? We do lots of planning, we do lots of scheduling. And you can accomplish great things with that. So this right-hand side picture, that's a giant house of cards with a guy right by it, right? So that's a human size there compared to the house of cards. That's an impressive house of cards. That's probably 2, 4, 6, like 8 or 9 meters tall. I mean, that's really impressive work. You can do a lot of stuff, but it's highly coupled. Each one of those cards depends on all the other cards. If I made a design mistake, it's very hard for me to change my mind. It's very fragile, so if anything breaks, the whole thing comes down, right? So it's impressive. I can do impressive things with coordination and scheduling and planning. It's very fragile. On the other hand, the left-hand side here, this is a Lego house. Now this Lego house is not nearly as big. The picture that I grabbed off the internet is not nearly as big as that house of cards, but you could do. You could make a Lego house that was as big, or hell, probably 10 times as big as that house of cards, and it would be way easier to build. Because each one of the individual pieces is independently valuable and complete unto itself, which means I can build things in a modular fashion. I can build things in any order. If I change my mind and want to change colors, I can pull things apart and put them back together. I've put myself in a situation where I can put a lot of people working. If you ever see kids working with Legos, a lot of kids working on the same thing together without a lot of talking, except laughing and goofing off. But way less coordination on the left-hand side. One of the problems with coordination is you certainly can do it, but coordination requires coordinators. And I really should change this for the British version of House of Cards. So I'm a recovering project manager. Some of my best friends are project managers, and they're nice people. And they do helpful things. No, seriously. Project management is a useful skill, so I don't throw it out the window. However, we have to recognize that it's fundamentally waste. Coordination is fundamentally waste. The customer doesn't pay for coordination. So we want to do as little of it as we possibly can in order to avoid drag on the organization. And because at a certain point, the coordination actually does turn to evil and people start murdering each other and pushing each other off train platforms and other things like that. To use a very technical example here, this is the idea of microservices. So if you're not familiar with this is a book I would highly recommend. Even if you're not a technical person, even if you're not a developer, read the first 2 chapters of the book and you will get a really interesting sense of what this is talking about. This is talking about building products in such a way that they are like Legos. They are interchangeable. I can detach components and replace them. So, how's this working for us? And I'm coming up on time, or maybe might go slightly over here. So it's actually worked extremely well. So we went from having to be very, very coordinated on stuff to being able to do some releases. So this is an example of a feature in our product that we changed from one thing into another. In the old world of doing things, we would have had to have a lot of teams involved. So this is something where we wanted to make a feature from something that was sort of hard-coded to one function to something that you could change it to be used for other things. And so that required dynamic labeling of the product. So the first thing we did was, or actually it wasn't the first thing, these things happened in different orders, but we added this new field in the database and we pre-populated it with the old label and we shipped it. We used that to relabel the UI in the browser and we shipped it. We used that to relabel the UI in the mobile and we shipped it. Later on, we added the edit field to the browser. Again, actually not later on, it happened along the way. The edit field to the browser, there was a new screen where you edited the stuff and we shipped it. It was in a quiet corner of the app because we were moving quickly. If people noticed it, so what? No big deal. Eventually, in essence, all of these things came together and just worked, including the marketing material, which was pre-written based on the UI mockups. So we had an example where we had the sales team, the marketing team, the browser, mobile, API, multiple teams all working independently on this feature. We've since reorganized our teams so they work. We wouldn't have to have multiple teams on this. But at the time, we were able to have 5 teams working on this feature with no coordination other than the initial design work that was designed for the teams to be decoupled. to give you a little bit of how well this works. So this is by now some sort of old stats, but this is our mobile team's release cadence. So this starts in the fourth quarter of 2013, goes to the first quarter of 2015. Actually, you could stretch this off like here back to 2011 and it would have been the same, one release per quarter. That's what we were doing for years. We started breaking things down smaller and practicing FizzGood, and we went to 2. And then we went to 7, 8. And then we went to 20s. And actually, since then, it's gone significantly higher. By the way, along the way here, this was actually multiple versions of the product, which means it wasn't just more releases, it was more releases across a more complex code base. It was the same people. It was the same tooling. So there was no technology, there was no adding resources. This was better planning of work. And actually, even better than that, so that was the production releases. This was releases into a beta environment where we went, again, prior to doing things this way, those two things equaled one another. After this, now the beta releases basically go on continuously. They're going out basically every day. And whenever, because we make each one of these items decoupled, each one's independent, which means whenever Apple decides to release our next version to production, they can do that and we don't care. We're just basically sort of piling things up, ready for them to ship whenever they're ready to ship. This has been very, very effective for us. A cautionary note, closing cautionary note. FizzGood, each one of these things is important. Each one of these things is interrelated. But they're only equal up to a certain point. And that certain point is going to depend on your business model. It's going to depend on what matters for your organization. So for us, we are a SaaS software company. So SaaS software customers don't buy the product that you are selling now, they buy the future of your product, right? So frequency of delivery, frequency of new stuff is the thing you must have in order to be a SaaS software company. So for us, the point of the exercise is frequency. And that means that we have to organize everything else around what we do in order to be able to deliver frequently. If you're a medical device company, it's probably good. If you're working in a contractor, subcontractor, multiple service company environment, then it might be decoupled because each individual piece of work has to be indistinguishable and people can work off the APIs without knowing anything about the other side of the equation. So you have to understand and build for yourself a model of what's the point of things for us, and therefore which of these other components of this have to be in harmony with this. The other thing that we realized was we needed to unpack good more effectively. So we had already talked about sort of, good enough, gold-plated versus garbage, but what we hadn't realized was different people were hearing it good translated to something different for them. So for some of those people like marketing and sales and product management as a proxy, good meant marketability. It meant capabilities in the product, checkboxes on the website that the customers would smile when they got it. For people in support and operations and training and things like that, technical excellence, sustainability was what they meant by good, right? Because they know that marketing and sales might pull our radio tower over, and at first that makes our customers very, very happy, but eventually the radio tower falls over and squashes the poor kid, and that's not good. So you've got to maintain a continuous balance of this. And it really, what we discovered, and I think this is going to be true for most anybody, that would be my hypothesis, is that smallness is actually the single lever that the teams have at their disposal to balance all of these things. So frequency is a must-have for our business model. There has to be this balance between the two flavors of good. Decoupled is more of an organizational design thing in terms of feature teams. But within the team, the one thing that they have at their disposal that keeps all of this stuff in balance is smallness. The smaller they can make things, the better it is, the more in balance they can get. I'm not going to read this slide, but that radio tower is actually modeled after a radio tower in Nashville, which is extremely famous and actually extremely lean in its design. So go back later and read this. Some suggested reading for you. The Phoenix Project, if you have not, please do, absolutely. Jim Benson's Personal Kanban, a couple of really good books by some Scandinavian folks from CRISP on Kanban and Lean from the Trenches. And if you really want to understand why this stuff works, if you really want to understand the logic of why Agile works, why Lean works, the book you must read, and it's not an easy read, is The Principles of Product Development Flow by Don Reinertsen. A masterwork of understanding why these mechanics work. We've got some great information out on the LeanKit website. It is all free. You don't have to like our product at all, but go please make use of all the webinars and case studies and ebooks and articles and all those kinds of things. These slides and all of the other slides for talks that I do are available on SlideShare. Just look for Jon Terry, Jon Terry, not the laddish guy from Chelsea. I don't know if he has stuff on SlideShare. And please follow me on Twitter, LeanKit Jon. And with that, I'm probably over, but not bad. Thank you very, very much.